Thank you for having me. I've really appreciated the difference that the Orange County Asperger Support Group has made in the community. I've been aware of it for about 15 years, and it's really expanded over the last 10 years or so to I don't know how many events you had just that you mentioned this month. Most support groups have one or two events, and your calendar is full. The D&D group, like I've heard amazing things about, and now the Jam group, that just sounds really peaceful and fun, and I'm glad that you can offer it. So it's an honor for me to ever be a part of any of the events that you have. And I really like the community. I really enjoy um, how you're all giving back to the community. So a little bit about me. I am a really creative problem-solving therapist. We do have 9 therapists at Uram Family Therapy. Um, I'll get to the about me in a second, but instead of just hiring therapists that were duplicate copies of myself, I thought I really want to understand everything about the human condition. So I brought on a lot of other therapists that do specialize in other things, that do EMDR therapy for trauma, that treat addictions, that treat launching. I consult with C-suite executives on being able to manage the stressors of a large company. We really do focus on helping out everyone exactly where they're at. And my passion is for helping individuals diagnosed with ADHD and autism. Um, I think that within this community, um, I really enjoy each session that I have, and I really enjoy seeing people get unstuck. So in organizing this presentation today, the thing that I found that is most useful is saying, I'm in this place right now, I'm coming to see a therapist, or, just life isn't the way that I really wanted it to be. And I can't seem to change it on my own. What do I do? So I kind of compiled my greatest hits of different interventions that I do. So instead of talking about theory, instead of going through like all these different kind of like higher level ideas about what would work, I'm literally going to go through different interventions that have evidence behind them and that really do help you get unstuck. So without further ado, I'll kind of get into the rest of the slides. And if you don't have access to the slides, I know that Judy shared in the chat the whole list of slides. And if you have any need for more of them, there's other links I can send you after the presentation as well. So do please reach out and we'll get them to you. So about me, let me get that to the side. So yeah, I'm a creative problem solver. I like a challenge, and I've noticed that in many ways, life is incredibly overwhelming. And whenever you are feeling depressed or anxious or just overwhelmed, it's really hard to be a creative problem solver. So whenever I meet someone in session, I see what's going on for them. I listen, I hear them out. And as they ask me, well, what do you think? My first answer is usually, I think that you have this skill or that skill, and let's do our best to be able to use that skill to make your life slightly better. So I kind of teach you to be your own therapist. And the more that you kind of have like the Michael voice in the back of your head, I've seen a lot of people's lives get better, not because they always meet with me, but because it's a overall change in your approach to life, not just, coming to see a therapist whenever things are really rough. So I really do enjoy others take that moment where they pivot their lives towards a more authentic, unique, and satisfying journey through all the challenges that the world presents, good, bad, and otherwise. So whether it's forming a new relationship, launching off to college, or just trying to walk into the classroom each day without having a panic attack. Those are all huge challenges that with a different skill set, usually things get slightly less intense. It doesn't solve everything, but I do try my best to be able to make each problem, if we can't resolve it, to be less stressful and less overwhelming. So I've been in practice 19 years. I've had, I think it's like 32,000 sessions. In each of the sessions, I try to do my best to understand somebody. And if I don't, in between sessions, I research it, I consult. A lot of the biggest names in the field that have put out research papers would gladly answer an email or consult. And the one thing that I think that distinguishes me as a therapist or as a human is that I'm okay reaching out to the expert and saying, I really am stuck here. What do I do? And I think that that approach or that thought pattern is incredibly useful for all areas of life. Is it's important to have a mentor, it's important to reach out to someone, and it's important to admit or at least know when we don't know. So that's also what led us having a lot of other specialties too, is so many individuals that have ADHD or autism also have comorbidities, also have other diagnoses. So anxiety and depression are the two most common ones that I'm going to talk about today. But I'm also going to address burnout. And especially throughout the pandemic, there's a lot of people that were experiencing burnout. So I wasn't the expert on that, and in developing an approach for it, found some great useful tools. So research. I dive into research all the time. I think that it really helps, especially for so many individuals with autism that feel stuck. Like life is overwhelming. There's not a lot of great options sometimes to then figure things out. And it feels overwhelming, like our body and our brain are telling us no. So I take that really seriously. And when I don't have answers, I do my best to evolve with research and dive into research. And there's a lot of great research that's come out over the last 5 years that I think has really evolved the field. So at the end of the slides, even if you want to jump ahead now, I don't mind. I have 5 pages worth of other resources that I recommend, and I'm briefly going to mention throughout this talk. So please feel free to go through them and see all the different things I recommend. Some of them are great videos, other are resources. One is a workbook that I'm a huge fan of. So please do use this talk as a launching point where there's tools that I give you that you can do without seeing a therapist at all. I give you the warning that you probably shouldn't, but I totally understand if you do. And then others, there's just great guides for going through treatment, or maybe some theories that you haven't heard of before that really do work for autistic individuals. So Uram Family Therapy, what is it? We are essentially a group of therapists. I'm the CEO, I'm the owner, that I reached out in the community and found other therapists that are creative problem solvers. That was my one criteria, is that as you're meeting with a client, how can you be able to learn from them and be able to give them every tool and resource you can imagine, that then they walk out of the session feeling more themselves with some new tools, with some new resources to use. So now we have about 600 sessions per month. And instead of just having like a basic treatment plan, what we do is we try to figure out for yourself how to be able to address the most important thing first. So we don't take a detailed intake at the beginning. We get right to helping you with the most important issue, which sometimes leads us to not have the bigger picture idea, but we also don't want to overwhelm you. And particularly for individuals with autism, listing every single challenge that you have in a 50-minute session and then walking out of the office is incredibly overwhelming, and I don't recommend it for anybody. So I like to start small. I like to start with one issue, and I like to give you tools and techniques to use. And I think it's more respectful of the client as well as for the process. And then after that, I listed all the different specialties that we have. One fun one that I think Drew's mentioned for my other book, the Parenting and Asperger's. And I also had the other book now come out that was the Emotion Journal for Gamers, where I realized a lot of individuals that I helped, particularly in the gaming crowd, had difficulty identifying a lot of emotions or identifying what they're going through. So whether it was emotional avoidance that led you to game, or you just really enjoy the process, I came up with a simple system for just documenting whether it was a positive or negative mood, and then being able to journal it through. And I used Minecraft as my template to paint it. So the book looks like Minecraft and has a bunch of Minecrafty ideas throughout it that really helps you identify emotions. So as I get to the first intervention here, know that that's one of the creative solutions that I've come up with is, if you are struggling with your emotions, if you are struggling with being stuck, the first thing to do is just write down plus signs or minus signs. You may not know the emotion, you may not know exactly why you're not doing something or what's making it so difficult to change. So the first step between not knowing your emotions and knowing them is to know what's called the valence and just writing down a plus sign or minus sign in a journal. That's for another talk about the whole Minecraft book. So I'm just going to go through solutions. I have a bunch of research articles at the end that support my ideas. And the most important theories that I use are cognitive behavioral therapy, which a lot of times is simplified to CBT, which essentially means if you change your thoughts and you change your behaviors, you end up changing your mood. The next is dialectical behavioral therapy, which developed from cognitive behavioral therapy, and it just has a lot of mindful components to it. My favorite one out of that is called the wise mind, where, as I'll talk a lot about getting unstuck, the best intervention for getting us unstuck that I've seen is recognizing that our emotions guide us even when we're not aware of it. So dialectical behavioral therapy really emphasizes understanding your emotions and understanding how they disrupt your logic. Because it may feel like you're being logical, it may sound like you're logical, but in reality, you have an emotional goal that you're, it's called intellectualizing. It's making it sound like it's a logical argument when in reality it's not, it's emotional. The other theory is acceptance and commitment therapy, which I've found incredibly useful whenever it'd be helpful to embrace reality, and it'd be helpful to just understand what different thoughts you're having, what different things we may need to accept. So sometimes it's accepting the diagnosis. Other times it's accepting that we were rejected, or that we did something impulsive, or that things won't be the exact way that we need them to be or want them to be. The other is positive psychology. So it sounds a little bit odd, but one of the most powerful things in positive psychology is the ability to recognize that learned helplessness is one of the most common things that lead us to feel stuck. So I'll get into a little bit more details in a second, but learned optimism is the #1 treatment for learned helplessness. And so many individuals that are adults diagnosed with autism rely on their caregivers or their parents and feel learned helplessness. It's overwhelming to problem solve or figure out a lot of independent life skills. So a lot of times they avoid solving those problems and do very little to resolve it, knowing that a caregiver or someone else will step in. And my goal in therapy, or my goal in life, is to be able to just point out that dynamic and ask the person, like, are you really worried that if you were in charge it wouldn't work out, or that it's really challenging, it's really tough? And a lot of the time they say, yeah, like, I don't know what to do. I know my parents are really good at it. They've been doing it forever. They promised that they'll take care of me, and now they're not. So there's a lot to be said for positive psychology, and particularly the concept of learned helplessness. Collaborative problem solving is probably my most commonly used approach for families. So Ross Greene's Explosive Child, very famous book, and essentially what it pivoted in my career, or at least for so many families that I've worked with, is kids do well if they can, adults do well if they can. We are lagging in skills, and the more that we learn these skills, things improve. So shaming, consequences, trying to have a power struggle, all of that just leads to fighting. It doesn't lead to long-term durable solutions for any problem. Another one is cognitive load theory. I recognize if I just go on and give you a lot of details in theory, it doesn't really stick with you the next day. You don't remember exactly what I said. So cognitive load theory was essentially saying, summarize just to the point, give an intervention, don't give a lot of examples, and allow people to ask questions. That's the best way to learn. And I hope that many school districts, incorporate that as well. Because hearing a professor go on for several hours, or a block schedule, has rarely worked for anyone on the autism spectrum that I've ever worked with. It's a terrible idea. I'd rather get right to the point, give details, and then wait for follow-up. Probably my most controversial theory out of all of this is the autism cluster theory. So on the autism spectrum, there's a lot of ambiguity, a lot of openness to be able to help people. But there's so much variability in the diagnosis So I may try an intervention for someone that's diagnosed with autism and it works great. I try it for someone else that's diagnosed with autism and it doesn't. So the autism cluster theory is trying to organize each symptom into a place that we can test out theories and treatments, because a lot of the treatments that we have, particularly in the psychotherapy realm, don't consistently work. And if we're able to narrow it down to what particular symptom would help, I think we'd have a higher chance of having a lot more really valid research come out, because a lot of the research that has come out has been inconsistent, where you'd have people that say, wow, this is amazing, I really want to use this, and then others say it's horrible and it's terrible. And it's also an article I posted at the end. I ask you to read it for yourself and judge for yourself whether autism spectrum may turn into autism clusters. Right. Oh, and I was mentioning Ross Green, the explosive child. So just keep in the back of your mind that throughout this presentation or throughout my practice, I really do believe that kids do well if they can. I really believe that every autistic individual can do well if they can. There isn't avoidance or emotional games or things like that that you would ever need to have, the power or control dynamic to be able to force someone to do something. The more you force someone to do something, all you're doing is leading them to not trust the world. And whenever your main goal is to help someone with social skills and you're telling them to not trust the world, you're sabotaging your own goal. And I saw that someone asked, can you give us a link to your work on the autism cluster? I didn't do any work. I'm just referencing research that's out there. But at the end of the slides, there is a link to the main author's article on autism cluster versus spectrum. So why are individuals stuck? We want to get unstuck. What is the most common response? Is like, well, why are you stuck? What leads you to be stuck? The most common answer I've heard lately is, I'm too burned out to try. I've been trying these things for years and nothing's helped. Or I'm too depressed to care. Like, life is overwhelming. I'm depressed. I'm honest with you, I'm depressed. It's not happening. Or I'd hear young adults say, this is your goal, mom, dad, caregiver. It's not my goal. You're trying to get me to achieve something that I don't want to achieve. I also hear that there's too many unknowns. I got to prepare for each thing. I got to be front loaded. And the world has way too many unknowns for me to be able to navigate this effectively. Or it's too sensory unfriendly. There's so many examples that I've seen of environments that you would ask an adult with autism to then go into, that if you pause, close your eyes, take in the environment, it's an incredibly sensory unfriendly environment that you're asking them to go into. And if we can't get into their shoes and understand how it's too loud, or how there's a lot of light noise, there's a lot of just busyness, or you have claustrophobic responses. If you don't understand what the person's going through, how are we able to help them? So I always say, if you're not sure, let's ask ourselves these questions about each of these areas. The last two were, you're asking me to, I'm stuck because you're asking me to do something without accommodating my needs first, which is a valid point. And the last is, I will fail anyway, so why try? And my answer to that is usually, if we continue to set you up for something and you continue to fail, then we're making the mistake, not you. Because if you're putting in the effort and it hasn't worked out, I think that the person in charge should have listened, should have made more effort to truly understand. I did see another question here, just about my background, which I'm fine answering. It says, why is your degree an MA instead of MS? So for psychology, we are the masters of arts. We don't get a master's in science. And particularly the master's that I got is probably the longest named master's you could ever imagine. It's a master's degree in clinical psychology with an emphasis in marriage and family therapy. And yes, all of that was written on my diploma. And it's the Pepperdine Graduate School of Education and Psychology. So got to go to school in Malibu. It was very nice, good view. Learned a lot. And it says, like, what does LMFT and LPCC mean? So after I got my master's degree in psychology, I then had to do 3,000 hours to work towards my licensure as a family therapist. So it's a Board of Behavioral Science. The California Board of Behavioral Sciences has 3 different licenses. I have 2 of them. Most people only have 1. So I'm licensed as a marriage and family therapist, and I'm licensed as a professional clinical counselor. And to be the professional clinical counselor, it actually has an emphasis on career counseling. So in addition to helping families work through challenges, I also have expertise in career counseling and understanding that dynamic in the work environment. So I could work easily in an HR department just as much as with a family and oppositional defiant disorder. That is the next slide, but sensory unfriendly means if you're asking someone why they're stuck and they have sensory issues or sensory integration diagnosis, then we're pretty much setting them up to fail and then saying we're not going to accommodate your sensitivity. So whether it's a sensitivity to fluorescent lights, whether it's the texture, whether it's the sound, there's a lot of reasons that individuals feel stuck or avoid certain scenarios because it's a sensory unfriendly place. And it isn't something that exposure therapy is going to help. It isn't usually something that you should accommodate, or you should accommodate. It isn't something you can force someone to just adapt to. And I think a lot of caretakers, a lot of individuals overly emphasize just dealing with something when you're trying to get someone to function while masking and doing everything else they can to function in that work environment, school. So the more it's a sensory friendly environment, you have a higher chance of someone thriving and getting unstuck. So I was just finishing up the I will fail anyway. And I think that that is incredibly sad whenever someone says, I'm going to fail anyway. And I sit with them through that sadness rather than try to force it to say, oh, it's not that sad, because it really devalues their experience. So the more that you sit with someone as they're in that awfulness, you're then being able to see what that stuckness is from their point of view, rather than just standing outside holding a hand to be able to pull them out of it. Because the answer isn't to just pull someone out. That doesn't really lead to a long-term solution. It's to understand where they're at and then observe the skills, resources, tools that they may have to navigate out on their own. So you must understand what you're stuck in. Is it quicksand? Is it, concrete? Whatever it is, ask clarifying questions, which means like, what's happening for you right now? How's your body experiencing this? What thoughts are you having? If you'd summarize it, I see this, this, and this. Does it sound like this? Yes or no? Chart it visually. I started using Microsoft Visio recently. I'm a huge fan of the MindMeister products, and I really love visualization exercises. All my offices have a whiteboard in them. I think it's really important to visually chart something that can be overwhelming. And also think of cognitive load theory. If you see everything charted out, you can zoom in on just one aspect of a challenge. Otherwise, everything just feels so overwhelming, and trying to keep that all in your working memory and trying to figure out something new doesn't work for anybody. So it's best to be able to offload your working memory as much as possible so you can just focus on the most important part. Don't rush through this step of understanding it. A lot of times I've seen caregivers or parents kind of rush through and say, okay, I think we got it, let's try this. But the more that you just understand somebody, you have a higher chance of them also being on board with whatever the potential solution is. And more importantly, they're the creator of the solution rather than just an observer to some other person's idea. Autonomy-based approaches are the only approach that respects everyone's boundaries and also leads to long-term success. So in all the different theories that I've used in treating autism, the one thing that I found is incredibly consistent with the stuckness or the psychological inflexibility or difficulty in social communication is musts, or in CBT we call them shoulds. The world should be this way. I need to be that way. Perfectionism, all or nothing thinking. All of this is actually addressed by a subset of CBT called REBT. So it's rational emotive behavioral therapy. And the three major musts are: I must do well and win the approval of others, or I'm worthless. Number two is other people must do the right thing, or else they are deserving of punishment. So the laws of fairness, the law of consequences, the law of everything should work this way. Why does the world not work this way? And then number three is life shouldn't be this difficult. So as things should be easier, as things should be flow more smoothly, whenever it doesn't, I've seen a lot of individuals give up because the challenges exceeded what you expected. And in social emotional learning, one of the most common terms that I use is this expected or unexpected? And whenever things are more likely to be, or are expected or more likely to be predictable, then life is smoother. So I try to help everyone figure out how to make this as predictable as possible. And if it's not predictable, chances are it'll still be good. So if any of these three musts are present, the individual likely has a demand that is inflexible and will lead you to feeling stuck and to not be open to change, not be open to a conversation about tolerating, awfulness in this world. So whether it's your own poor performance or perceived like your own, like you'd see yourself as being bad, tolerating other people just making other choices that don't make any sense and are negative, or just the effort that you put in is much more so than you had predicted. So that's kind of a complicated one. So again, if anyone has any questions about the three musts, that's probably half of what I think would really help an individual get unstuck, and someone I don't even treat, just like on your own, saying, is it these three? So good question there. So the question was, what exactly do you mean by the right thing or deserving of punishment? Do you mean that people want to punish other people for things that they see as wrong, but are not actually wrong? Close. What, again, is not 100% individuals with autism have this belief, but there is a common pattern that others in this world make specific choices where they're not doing the right thing, and that the world, there's a belief that the world should be fair. So then you have so much anger that they're doing the wrong thing, and it is actually wrong. So that the last part there, you said, like, is it they're doing wrong things that are not actually wrong? No, they're clearly wrong. But whenever you spend so much time being angry at someone that's wrong, and that person isn't asking for your feedback and they aren't open to changing their mind, it's important to let that person go from your perceived sense of control. Because the more that we stay stuck on other people doing the wrong thing, you're going to be irritated with a coworker and then get fired because you're so frustrated and overwhelmed by other things. You may have a peer that just irritates you to no end. You may have a political opponent that just is doing and saying ridiculous things and is not open to your perspective. And all of that energy becomes wasted because you're trying to change something you don't have control over. So my answer is that the world in some ways is unchangeable. So the best approach sometimes is save your spoon, save your energy, and not try to fix the people that aren't asking to be helped, because everyone deserves to have autonomy. And it is an incredibly complex concept of community involvement. But the more that we focus on the things that we can change the most, we have the highest chance of success of having peacefulness and satisfaction in life, even when there's people out there that we despise. Okay. Um, so I'm, thank you so much for being here, and I welcome any more questions that you have. And I'm glad that a part of it really resonated with you. Someone asked a good follow-up question is like, what if these wrong things are directly harming the person? What if the person receives prejudice directed towards them because of their race, religion, gender, sexuality, disability, etc.? And those things are directly harming us. There's, I mean, in the political spectrum, there's definitely things that I see clearly impacting and being awful and don't seem to be abating anytime soon. What I do recommend is figuring out how much of our daily energy we can expend fighting people that are directly trying to harm us. And whenever we're able to figure out that it's an energy equation, not a right or wrong equation, because in many of these instances, we're completely right, but the energy that we expend on it gets in the way of us functioning. So I say prioritize the most important things in your life first. And as you have the energy, certainly fight for what's right. Definitely go towards um, advocating for equality, understanding, and compassion. And it's whenever it overtakes your most important priorities. So, I mean, it's something as basic as sometimes like hygiene or self-care, education, or work. If we're neglecting our main, Maslow's hierarchy of needs to be able to fight against someone that definitely is in the wrong, it's a difficult decision, but we have to take care of ourselves first and then advocate for our needs second. Because there is a hierarchy of our own basic needs that then supersedes someone else trying to bring us down. And yes, each that anti-Semitism makes me incredibly angry too. And all forms of prejudice are awful. And the biggest challenge of that is what to do whenever you're right and no one's listening. And I mean, there are a lot of policy books on what we can do, and a bunch of other things I can get into that are related to self-advocacy and or political advocacy. But this presentation is more towards getting unstuck individually, and it's the energy equation that I found kind of releases you. And there's a follow-up question for, are these three things related to autism specifically? No, Albert Ellis developed this, and I believe even before the DSM-3 came out. And he found it to be true for most individuals that these are the three things that lead us to be stuck. And at that time, he was saying anxiety and depression. So the theories evolved from there. He passed away, I don't know, 15 years ago. But the theory of rational motive behavioral therapy still rings true to this day, and it's one of the most effective forms of cognitive behavioral therapy. So I got a little too into heavy theory there, so I even mentioned on the slides, I'll try not to get too into heavy theory. But in getting unstuck and being able to get to your own ideal version of life, this page is all about that, where whenever you respect everyone's boundaries, you have a higher chance of coming to a durable solution. So just like we would say, like other people out there in the world don't respect our boundaries and then expect us to just fit in, or expect an autistic individual to fit in, it's awful. So learned optimism comes about when people do respect our boundaries, and we do have hope for the future, and we do have hope for our capabilities and our skills and our resources to be enough. The second is figure out who's in charge of going beyond your comfort zone, me, others, or both. Um, um, so whenever I'd see parents force kids to go outside of their comfort zone, I've seen the kids trust the world a lot less, because whenever I would voluntarily go into a battle and an argument, I feel safe. Whenever someone's forcing me beyond that, I not only feel unsafe in the argument, I also feel unsafe that someone's pushing me towards it. So the more that you can respect everyone's boundaries, I see a higher chance of a long-term solution. So I recommend knowing the pillars of motivation. So anytime you feel unstuck, if you even want to write this down, do I have the knowledge to get it done? Do I have the energy to get it done? And do I have the social support to get it done? If you have those three things, you have a much higher chance of getting anything done, anything from a homework assignment to a major project, to getting a degree, to getting married. We need the tools to be able to get things done, and the tools usually require the knowledge, so learning about it, and the energy to then do so. So if you have all the knowledge and you're burned out, you're not going to get anything done. And if you have the knowledge to get it done, you have the energy to get it done, and a person you trust says, oh, that's a stupid idea, you're not going to try anyway. So knowledge, energy, and social support are the three driving forces to getting unstuck. Okay, so you said for the last bullet point, you don't suggest ABA sessions. No, for many individuals with autism, I found that ABA works really well at compliance. If done properly, it's respectful, but a lot of times ABA is not done properly, where you don't get the child's consent. If you don't have the child's consent and you're forcing them to do a lot of things outside their comfort zone, you have a very high chance of creating trauma for them, where a trusted adult is taking the things that they love and making them into rewards to get them to do really uncomfortable, really useful things that they're not agreeing to do at that moment. So I do believe in collaborative problem solving. I do believe in a lot of other listening techniques to hear somebody out, to increase their chances of change that is with their permission, is with and respecting their autonomy. So in the field of psychotherapy, we have to do something called informed consent before we meet with clients. So I always get the kid's permission, like, can we talk about this? Is it okay to talk about this? And in ABA, I found all too often that the kid doesn't get permission. Like the parent signs off and says you can do it, but the kid says, no, I don't want to do this. Stop trying to get me to do this. And they do more avoidance behaviors, more arguing, biting, fighting, so many different things. And then the kid's then diagnosed as a biter or a fighter, when in reality, they said, just respect my boundaries. This is hard for me to do. And if you force me to do it, I'm going to fight back. So I think that it's an incredibly controversial, argument. And I'm sure sometimes ABA, when done properly, will work. I read through the ABA manual. It's like 600 pages. I didn't read all of them, but it doesn't recommend forcing someone to cry and be upset and hit and kick and still force them to do the behavior anyway. So I think that having RBTs implement something that a BACA recommends without the proper training or the proper self-regulation skills is potentially dangerous. So escape extinction is an ABA concept where you don't allow someone to escape. You don't give them a route to then not do the task, and you keep giving them bigger and bigger consequences until they do it. That's what leads to learned helplessness. That's what leads to depression. That's what leads to burnout sometimes, is having so many people force you to do things you don't want to do that you finally stop even trying or feeling like you're important enough to then fight back. There's two other questions that came through as I was saying that. What kind of therapy do you recommend for Asperger's and OCD? What kind of psychology do your 6 therapists do individually? So I have the link to my website where it actually, you can go through the profile of all the therapists. But 3 of us treat OCD, and 4 of us, not myself included, use EMDR for trauma. where the one question I saw was, can I talk a little bit more about seeking accountability and showing support? So for parents, the most effective tools that we give our kids is to be near to them and available as a guide or available as a consultant, um, while also giving them accountability. Because kids don't understand the way the world works and are trying to figure it out. So the more that we have timelines, the more we have accountability, where it wouldn't be that we give a kid a consequence, but we'd ask them, like, it seems like you want to learn this, it seems like you're trying to learn that. What point are you stuck on? So as a caregiver, if you ask somebody, like, what are you stuck on right now? Like, what is the stuck point? You're giving them accountability for describing where they're at and then giving them a way to move forward. So the way that I use video games in therapy kind of applies to this, where I play Fortnite and Minecraft and chess and everything else with clients. But the way that they set up rewards, let's just say Fortnite, for example, it's a lot of specific rewards, a lot of frequent rewards, minimal effort to get a reward, but all of it is in a positive realm. You don't take away things, you don't lose things as a form of accountability. You just keep marking off all of the progress that the person's making, and it builds their self-esteem, and you're there for support. So if they hit something that's really challenging, you're there to be able to help them get over that hurdle without shoving them over that hurdle and without picking them up and putting them over it. But you're there as an ally to get through it, rather than someone forcing them, and rather than someone pulling them, and rather than just, flopping on the ground, you picking them up and putting them over it, as in learned helplessness. So someone did ask, do I provide ERP for OCD? Yes. So I do treat OCD, and ERP is an effective tool. I don't believe that ERP works for everything. So I try to screen as well, to figure out like how to use ERP to be able to get someone past a goal that they had set out. But there's certain things it doesn't work for. And then sensory issues. I think that the more that we really do understand what sensory issues a person has, or even for ourselves, what sensory issues we have, or even getting evaluated by an SLP or an OT for speech and for sensory issue, in addition to speech and language issues. If we don't have the bigger picture, we don't understand that the person may have a specific learning disability or dyslexia, we then get stuck on an issue when in reality we're treating the wrong thing, and they may need speech therapy or they may need OT to be able to get past this issue, or to accept this issue and not keep forcing them. So that way we're learning so much more about ourselves or the person we're trying to help, and the more that we have specific data, we can then make specific accommodations. So the next question I saw, how does a young adult get unstuck with all the anger they have from growing up, bullying specifically, and mistakes parents made and made them upset? The best approach that I've seen is to be able to use acceptance and commitment therapy, because the more we try reasoning through it or finding a great explanation for it, like even the example you're giving, Judy, is like, well, what about when you have really good intentions and you're trying to do your best and experts are telling you to do something? I don't think any level of logic is going to solve the issue. But what does solve the issue is acceptance of it, acknowledgement of it, not minimizing it on anyone's account, and saying we accept that as part of our story, even though it didn't go well. And the more we have intense feelings about it, it doesn't really get us anywhere. We've learned from it. It's regrettable. It's, awful. But there are some strengths. Let's see what we learn from it, and let's continue to connect. And that's how to get unstuck. Because kids that bullied us, any level of even apology now doesn't really kind of cure the awfulness that it was then. It just gives you a little bit of acceptance. So acceptance and commitment therapy is incredibly important, where the main goal is accepting it as a story and not allowing it to interfere with your day-to-day life. So one thing's called the struggle switch. And whenever you have so much on your mind on a day-to-day basis, it's hard to focus on what you really want to focus on. That intensity of thought, or that obsessiveness of thought, does turn into OCD and is unhealthy. So we have to think about things the right amount of time in the right context. And going through like cognitive processing therapy, or EMDR for trauma, has been really helpful for autistic individuals, and I do recommend that. And that does help give you closure over the events, but rarely does it make those events make sense. So the next thing I said is, if you're thinking like, well, I don't want to get unstuck, I don't need to get unstuck, I don't have the energy to get unstuck, I shouldn't need to mask that much to just get through day-to-day life. And I was mentioning it earlier, it's like, I'm just going to fail anyways, so why try? Or you can't force me, mom, dad, caregiver, or just creating a fight. So as someone saying, well, we have to do this, this is the time to do this, you got to go do this, and then you create a fight so then the discussion doesn't continue. Or if you have no interest in it, like, or it's just too tough. All of those things are letting me know, or even can let you know, that it may help to just explore some of these ideas to feel unstuck. Because whenever you do feel really just kind of overwhelmed by all these things, those are the answers I usually hear. But whenever you have a specific answer to it, and you really try to just avoid the problem altogether. Let me restate that. If you're overwhelmed by the problem, you're going to come up with reasons to not do it. But if you pay attention to your emotions may guide you into then having closure about whether you're going to or not do whatever the thing would be. So it's okay to not want to do something. My answer, all of this isn't saying, well, if you're stuck, you must get unstuck, you must make progress. No, sometimes it's okay to then just not change, but it's not okay to not know why. One of the best questions that doesn't get asked, that should get asked, is, well, is someone asking me to do this, or do I need to do this because it's a social rule or a social construct? Not because it's healthy, but because we're fitting in? Well, then I'm just going to mask to solve the problem. And if I'm masking to solve the problem, I'm exhausted, because then I just have this like narrative in the back of my mind, don't say this, say this. And then I'm presenting to someone else an inauthentic version of myself. So if they want to be my friend, they want to hang out with me, they want to hang out with that mask that I was wearing. They don't really want to hang out with me. So the best thing that I've seen come from support groups or social groups is that you don't have to mask. You can just be yourself and be as quirky or unique as you already are, and have other individuals embrace it rather than judge it. I love that aspect of it. You get to say, well, for like, I don't want to do something, is, well, am I avoiding something out of fear? Am I not doing it because of the unknown, because it's scary, because it's beyond my comfort zone, because last time I did it, someone was awful to me? Or is it just a preference? Is it really necessary to then go past my comfort zone and get this done? Is it potentially embarrassing or socially awkward? Or the last time I did it, it was socially awkward. So whenever you go through and you would ask yourself those questions and have it answered like, oh yeah, it's just a preference. I don't want to because, I just don't like the beach, or I have sensory issues with the sand and it gets in my toes, and I don't want to work through figuring out how to use the hose, or like buying a $50 shower thing. So when I go to the beach, I'm okay, or wearing, rain boots when I go to the beach. Let me just not go to the beach. So whenever you want to get unstuck, it's important to just have the conversation all the way through, rather than not have the answer yourself, or not have other people that, are key players in this, have all those answers. So let's get into the depression, burnout, and anxiety side of this. So ASD depression has a few different forms, and again, ask me questions about this, is also kind of a complicated thing. It has aspects of identity depression and a state depression that often includes burnout. So identity depression is like a long-term depression, or like pervasive depressive disorder is like the term for it, but it's not exactly what I'm going at here. It's your core self. Me as a person is depressed. Um, it's not just behaviors that I have. It's not just that I failed a test. It's that I'm a failure. So one is my identity, and the other is something that I did. Um, and it's identity depression is often diagnosed as episodic depression, where you have major depressive disorder, which is mild, moderate, severe, with psychosis, not with psychosis. Um, but episodic depression is related to recent events. It's usually like just 2 weeks or so as you go through something, and then it slightly gets better through using cognitive behavioral therapy, using an ABCDE workshop, a thought disputation, worksheet, or a thought disputation worksheet, or just time healing wounds. Um, so if you're able to break it down that I'm depressed about who I am, or I'm depressed about a situation, you're able to at least know where to start to then get unstuck. And if it's both of those, either of those, neither of those, and it's still burnout, well, burnout depression is very specific to the energy expended. So you may say the ideas sound good or don't sound good, but either way, I failed so many times with ideas that have sounded good, whatever that you made me try, that I'm just going to exist. I'm going to be in my room. Don't bother me. Don't knock. I'm done. I'm burned out. Please stop trying to get me to have hope. That's burnout depression. So if you're able to identify whether it's your identity, whether it's your behavior, or whether it's your situation, each of those depressions is different and requires a different plan to get unstuck. Identity depression is trying to find your identity that maybe you're not paying attention to right now, or maybe the identity that you feel that you have is inaccurate. Episodic depression is, well, this is fleeting, this is changeable. And whenever it's changeable, I can get unstuck if I change my thoughts, I change my beliefs, I do a cognitive distortion worksheet, or in the end, I'll actually recommend, whatever, I'll recommend it now. There's a logical fallacy workbook where we actually go through and see, like, am I actually tricking myself? What are logical fallacies? What's a red herring? What is tu quoque arguments? And I won't get into all those details now, but if you're able to figure out bad reasoning, you're able to figure out that you're likely depressed or have, burnout based on a faulty thinking pattern rather than reality. So to get unstuck for depression, number one is change your identity by seeing things realistically. Number two is changing your behaviors by identifying distorted thoughts. And number three, for burnout, it's decreasing the amount of expectations that you have, at least temporarily, to build up your amount of energy. So for a lot of individuals that have suicidal ideation or suicide attempts, I've recognized that burnout is a key contributing factor, because they just can't try anymore and they feel overwhelmed and make an impulsive choice. So the number one thing that I write to school districts for parents in advocacy of is reduce expectations of somebody that's burned out, and you have a higher chance of them wanting to be here. So burnout depression is real, and the ASD population has a higher chance of suicidal ideation because of sensory burnout, because of meltdowns, because of depression sticking around, because of panic attacks. We really need to pay attention to how much we push people. And the only thing I'd even say to that in other responses, sometimes individuals may also use that suicidal ideation as a way to then avoid. So then I'd also ask them, like, are you truly feeling suicidal right now, or are you feeling overwhelmed? If you're feeling overwhelmed, let's talk it through. And if you are feeling suicidal, let's figure out a way to get a higher level of care so we can get you in a good place, and then we can talk it through. But either way, really listen to the person and really listen to yourself and get the support and resources that you need. I mean, also going in for danger to self-evaluation is a whole nother thing, but that's for another talk. Oh, that's a good question. Is burnout and rock bottom one and of the same? No. Sometimes, I guess they're similar concepts. For me, my understanding of rock bottom is you're sick and tired of being sick and tired. And that is burnout. Um, but oftentimes it's actually, I can say they're pretty overlapping concepts, because the pivot point from being sick and tired of being sick and tired is reaching out for support, reaching out for help, and getting a higher level of care. But one is just related towards everyday life overwhelming you, and rock bottom is everyday life overwhelming you and having an addiction concern or problem. So yeah, I'll actually say rock bottom and burnout are, I'd say, like 95% overlapping. The only real difference I've seen is like you can be burned out without having addiction. Great question. Made me think. Um, all right, next up, autistic burnout. It's also related to masking. So I wanted to make sure that I emphasize this point too, is one way to get unstuck is to mask less often. So particularly for autistic women, young adults, I hear that I'm not even sure who I am, and I mean males as well, but more frequently with women, is I'm not even sure who I am anymore because I've been masking, trying to just survive. And they often say that women are underdiagnosed as having autism because society emphasizes that they mask more often than males do. And the effort and the just intensity of the pressure to mask for women is more intense. So it's exhausting. Trying to figure out whether someone's being sarcastic with you, or trying to hear someone whenever there's a lot of din and noise around you, or just trying to understand what they're saying can be really stressful. So understanding that burnout kicks in not just from being exhausted by work, school, or expectations, it can also be from masking. And when you have autism, you often have to put forth a significant amount of effort beyond what a neurotypical person exerts in life. So in addition to the sensory issues or the way you approach life, the social communication issues, all of those things require more effort. And I also really appreciate spoon theory's approach, where it's designed for a different disability, but it really applies to autism as well, where we only have enough spoons per day. So let's just figure out how to expend the right amount of energy towards the right tasks, because otherwise you'll be burnt out for days and you'll need recovery days. There isn't a great burnout tool for high school students that's official. I have a modified one that I wasn't comfortable sharing it here, but there's an official one called the Burnout Assessment Tool, or there's another one called the Maslow Burnout Inventory that you can purchase. But both of those look at burnout overall. And if you want to screen yourself for it, these are the tools to do so. At Uram Family Therapy, we offer like like kind of like a yearly checkup where we screen you for anxiety, depression, burnout, ADHD, and autism. And that's one of the ones we include with it for adults. So, this one. So alternative explanations for feeling stuck. So I kind of went through the most likely candidates. For most individuals that are stuck, I would say depression is the number one answer, anxiety, then burnout, then sensory issues, and social issues, family issues of being pressured. But here's some other alternative explanations that I want to throw out there. A lot of individuals I've seen have active avoidance, is as there is an issue that potentially may come up, they have aversion to just getting unstuck. So they just don't talk about it, avoid it, come up with any reason other than not discuss it. There's a question came through, so I was a little distracted. So active avoidance is essentially leading you to then not progress because you're not even considering what the issue would be or how to tolerate it or how to deal with it, but avoidance is your main coping skill. So the question that came through was, I said it's often difficult for autistic women to hear someone speaking when there's a lot of noise. Is autism correlated with hearing difficulties? It's highly correlated with auditory processing disorder, and also hypersensitive hearing. So the highly sensitive person book addresses it as well, where if you're not even on the spectrum, you can still have the same exact issues. But I may have said it right around the autistic women conversation for loud noises. Yes, that's true, but I would say that across all genders, auditory processing disorder and sensory or hypersensitivity to sound are rather common for autistic individuals. So apathy. Another reason for feeling stuck is just having apathy. We have sometimes such a strong, and again, this is just for a subset of individuals with autism, you have such strong emotions and a sense of justice and fairness that sometimes you give up and have apathy and saying, like, I've tried so long, I'm just gonna have learned helplessness. Because I see that society rejects my pursuit of what is right. Politicians don't support me, no one really cares, so why try? And the individual then doesn't get unstuck in their own life after seeing like society's apathy for so many different issues. Anxiety. I didn't have a whole slide for it, but anxiety does lead to a lot of individuals feeling stuck. But the treatment plan is a lot simpler than depression or burnout. Whenever you feel stuck and you have anxiety, cognitive behavioral therapy is actually incredibly effective. Actually, for all the different diagnoses, that's probably the most effective psychotherapy is understanding a panic attack, allowing it to come on and saying, yeah, I'm gonna have a panic attack, my heart's gonna race, I'm gonna feel like I'm gonna die, I'm overwhelmed, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, and then it's gonna be over. So in David Burns' When Panic Attacks, he talks about running up a set of stairs if you feel like you're gonna have a heart attack, or doing opposite action in DBT when you're gonna have a panic attack. All these interventions are incredibly successful and really lead you to feel unstuck rather quickly. So I have some resources at the bottom. I didn't mention David Burns' When Panic Attacks, but that's another good book. And sometimes this anxiety comes out of feeling like the world needs to be all or nothing. It needs to be one way or another. And what I've noticed is compromises are everywhere. Having autism leads you to continue to seek out ideal solutions or have unrealistic perfectionism that then irritates and frustrates you to the point that you feel stuck because you can't identify a place or a way where life is good. But in reality, what we're looking for is a good enough life, not the perfect life. And tolerating distress, understanding that our neighbors or our community doesn't get autism or any of the other identifying traits that you have for no particularly good reason, it's depressing. So having anxiety is sometimes expected, but we want to have it just to a certain degree. So on a scale of like 0 to 10, where 10 is a panic attack, oftentimes a healthy individual goes through life with anxiety at like a 3. Having anxiety like a 0 and being perfectly peaceful is, I mean, I would say unreasonable. So there's compromises everywhere, even with our default level of anxiety. And then specific learning disorders. That often leads to people feeling stuck, especially whenever you got to, go to college to then, read all these different books to then get college credit. Whenever you have an undiagnosed specific learning disorder, which in the past was called math disorder, dyslexia, and it's a few other specific learning disorders. So 7.5 to 10% of autistic individuals have a specific learning disability based on some of the studies that I've read. The majority of them are not assessed or treated for it. So you just get the diagnosis of autistic spectrum disorder. You wouldn't get the specific learning disorder assessment as well. And a lot of school districts that I know may not also screen for that, even though I know a lot do. So I wouldn't just say, well, we were evaluated by the district, so therefore you were screened for it. I would ask about specific assessment measures for specific learning disorders. And there's a bunch of, local psychologists that can offer that testing as well. So ASD depression, what's unique about it? What I've seen that's more unique about it is the mental magnet of depression is more powerful if you have autism. So having a negative mental filter or just viewing data that is depressing, the neurotypical individual does have that, but it's not as strong as if you have ASD. The other thing that I've noticed is that the ability to then tolerate discomfort is lessened if you have ASD. So for the first area, I was recommending cognitive behavioral therapy, where specifically you would do what's called the survey method and ask others how they're dealing with it. Or you would do a thought record where you would identify your hot thoughts or your stuck thoughts about a particular issue. Or in REBT, there's called the ABCDE method, where you would identify the antecedent. What's like the triggering event? What are my beliefs about it? What are the consequences of it? How do I dispute the unhealthy aspects of it? And how do I then go through and evaluate, how to move forward? What different things I learned from it? And how do I then, incorporate this into my life? So I gave an example there of in CBT is this really as bad as it feels? So sometimes we may feel really bad, therefore think that it's really bad. And in cognitive behavioral therapy, that's the number one thing, at least as therapists, that we're taught, is that just because it feels bad doesn't mean it is bad. So it's believing that something's rational when in reality it's emotional. So you then say, if I ask myself in 1 week about this, would it feel as intense? If I had a friend with the same diagnosis as me give me advice, what would be different than the way that I'm thinking now? And then for acceptance and commitment therapy to get you unstuck from ASD depression, it's accepting the diagnosis of autism's global effect on your social interactions. So whenever things don't go well or it's a lot of effort to interact with others, understand neurodiversity, understand that other people may not be as patient with a diagnosis. So it doesn't mean they're rejecting you, it means they're rejecting the diagnosis. And it was a struggle for you in that moment to connect with them, not because you are flawed or, bad in any way. It's just this neurotypical individual doesn't get autism. So accepting the diagnosis or accepting the situation is incredibly important because you see yourself as context. You're able to zoom out to the bigger picture and say, sometimes these things happen and I'm living my life through my values and my committed actions, and that's all I have control over. So the theme for getting unstuck through a lot of this tonight was really understanding that we don't have control over a lot of things we wish we would. And as we accept our diagnosis, accept the situation, we have a higher chance of being resilient and being able to solve a lot of the long-term issues, not by working through them, but accepting them. Learned optimism arises when you seek out the creative solutions rather than give up due to the negative mental filter or the mental magnet. All right, here's some questions here. No, thanks for coming. My son has ADHD and is on the spectrum. One thing that we have seen with him is he doesn't like structure, set schedules, etc., because he also seems stressed because he feels like we are often coming at him with a lot of unpredictable asks, such as do your homework, pick up your clothes, brush your teeth. Any suggestions on how to work with a young teen on that? Yes, I've seen a lot of individuals that have autism and ADHD have both ends of that frustration side where they feel like they need a lot of structure, but then they also get irritated or angry about it. So whenever I would, what I would recommend is having your son develop the structure himself and trying out and doing an experiment. Because I'm a huge fan of the scientific method. If he developed a plan of saying, let's see what happens if I do this, let's see what happens if I do that, he would have a lot of data points that then he trusts to then improve or change his behavior. Because chances are, if he's resisting a lot of those things and seems really stressed, either has the perfectionism side of saying, I need to do each of these things perfectly or else it's, not acceptable. And my answer for getting unstuck is to tolerate a good enough job, tolerate 10 seconds of brushing your teeth rather than zero, tolerate not having breakfast some days and just getting out the door on time, making compromises. So having any level of wins without mentioning the losses usually builds up that person's sense of self-esteem because they're doing a good enough job in some of the areas. And they may have unrealistic expectations of perfectionism that then lead them to feel like today was a failure because they only did 3 out of 10 things right. And in reality, they should just be seeing the 3 wins and being okay with the other things that didn't work out today, because it builds up your energy and your resilience to then keep going. Thanks everyone for coming. There's a few people that had to go. The next thing was, is it common for neurotypicals to misunderstand autistic people? What are common causes of these misunderstandings? Neurotypical individuals see patterns everywhere that they're not consciously aware of, and then believe that autistic individuals also see these patterns or ways of organizing life, and feel like if you don't see these patterns, there's something wrong with you. So whenever you point out to a neurotypical person, I'm neurotypical, so I make this mistake too, that all the assumptions that we make aren't valid. There's a lot of gaps of knowledge that we just fill in to just make assumptions and then treat people as if our assumptions are true, and then get frustrated or surprised whenever an autistic individual says, no, I went through data point by data point, and this is the way that I view it, and it's unique. It's not the way a neurotypical person would see it. The neurotypical person is more hesitant to then really understand the neurodiverse person just out of ignorance and or indifference to their situation. So they say, it works for most people, why doesn't it work for you? So that is the response I've seen from a lot of neurotypicals, is the autistic individual isn't worth the effort of trying to figure them out, which is awful, but that is what I've seen. Yeah, sure. What are one of the patterns that most neurotypical people see that most autistic people do not? Well, the one I would see, the biggest, most controversial thing was eye contact. And we don't often recognize how emotionally overwhelming it is to make eye contact with others, or how often neurotypical people don't make eye contact. We do eye check-ins. So as you have eye contact with somebody, you kind of look around and you come back in a little bit. It's a way of our eyes interlocking creates an emotional response in our chest and our body of love, compassion, and for many individuals with autism, I've seen it's overwhelming to them. So it's not like you're apathetic and don't care about the other person, but making that eye contact is overwhelming to all of your senses that you can't even hear what they're saying. So neurotypical individuals often believe that the autistic individual is disinterested, or they're looking at their phone while trying to have a conversation or something else. It's a way of not having the emotions be overwhelming, so then you can hear the other person out. So you may miss out on eye contact and nonverbal cues, but that autistic individual is trying to tell you, I want to hear you, so let me do this coping skill so I can hear you. John Elder Robison's book, Look Me in the Eye, was a good model of that, a way he kind of described what he goes through. And the next question is, what if I'm stuck because I don't know what I want to do with my future? When people ask me what I want to do as a career, I have trouble figuring it out. It feels a bit overwhelming to think about what I want to do for the rest of my life, in quotation marks. I get asked that question a lot, and I think that saying something so broad and taking it so literally is incredibly unfair to both parties. We rarely know what we want to do in the future, and most individuals only really pick a major, 2 to 3 years in to college, and now that community college is free for 2 years, a lot of people are even deferring it to their third year. I think that as a whole, we don't prepare people for what a career really looks like, and don't do enough, on the job kind of like, interactions to see what the job actually looks like. So we don't really have like go to work with your parent day anymore. We don't have, conversations or great YouTube videos about what a day in the life of most jobs looks like. So I'd actually encourage most career centers to have that video of what does it look like to work in this environment? What does it, look like otherwise? Like some jobs you can not really get a good feel for it till you're there because the one employer is awful and the other's really good. So one link that I put in the end was this company called Building H, where they actually rank companies based on how enjoyable it is to work there, how environmentally friendly it is, how accessible to public transport it is. And sometimes if we go specifically to the company and the job that we'd ideally like to work for and make it very literal and very, very specific, then it may be easier to then figure out what career we'd like or what job we'd like to do. One recent example that I've done is there's a company called Marvell in Irvine. And they were in the news recently because they have these great, mobile chips and semiconductors that they custom make to make 5G work more efficiently, or SSDs to process information slightly faster. And you'd still live in Orange County and work for Marvell if you got an electrical engineering degree and figured out how to design semiconductors. And most people don't know what electrical engineering is, or that it's a subset, or that there's certain schools that give you a better education in it than others. So sometimes reverse exploration of what you want to do for your career may give you a little bit more of an idea. But one other aspect that I kind of encourage sometimes is, well, for schools, look at the school's promotional video, what a day in the life on campus is like. Look at their DSP, their Disability Services Office, and what things that they offer. And if you don't exactly know what you want to do, kind of get a taste for what their main majors are, and find local people that you may call or talk to, or even see what the job listing looks like, so you have a better understanding of what that job may look like or what accommodations you may need if you do that job. But just asking the broad questions like, what do you want to do in your life? We don't know. I mean, 30 years ago, the average person had, I think it was like 1.2 careers in their life. Right now, we're at 2.5. So things are evolving career-wise that my guess is that you may have 3 career switches throughout your lifetime. So what you're getting trained in now may not be exactly applicable to what you're doing when you're 40. So it's best to figure out what your passion is and what you really enjoy doing now, and then trying to find as many things or classes or jobs where you may get to do that thing a lot. Like one person really struggled with social interactions and really liked going on hikes. The U.S. Forestry Service has plenty of jobs that don't pay that great, but you'd be able to be outside most of the time and get to go on hikes and walks and just make sure that, whatever aspect of the Forestry Service you're doing well goes well. So find the job that works well for you that may not be something that you immediately see when you do a Google search. But usajobs.gov is great. There's other programs like Auticon or Gavicon that help match a job for autistic individuals to what your strengths and weaknesses are, make accommodations. Auticon gets the job and then subcontracts out to you. Gavicon gets you the job directly. Local, the regional center and Department of Rehab both have programs that try to match you to the ideal job. Let me see, there's a few other comments there as I was speaking. Would you recommend all online colleges for autistic people? Maybe. I mean, there's quite a few schools that have very very neurodiverse friendly programs. Anywhere from, where Sarah Gardner started that whole program up in Washington to, I mean, there's a long list that at the Autism Society went through and listed very autistic friendly colleges. But if you need to go to school online, that's fine with me. I wouldn't say that the on-campus experience is a necessity, but it is kind of helpful trying to adapt to living on your own. And if you get the accommodations to do so and are able to tolerate that distress, it's kind of fun. All right, the next question is, my biggest issue I'm dealing with is ruminating about ruminating, which is probably leading me to burnout. What kinds of therapies would be helpful? So for ruminating, probably the most effective intervention would be in the OCD realm, even though it's more of like a CBT-ish kind of issue. But whenever you overthink something, you allow yourself to only have a half hour a day thinking it through, and then you create a visual chart of it, you create a mind map of it, you have some way of externalizing it so you see it represented in different mediums. And then that concept that you're ruminating on often stays stuck until you have closure or some kind of answer to it. But if you don't have an answer, at least you have a visual representation. And if you create a time frame and you schedule your worry for a certain time, you then say, okay, well, Thursdays at 5, that's the time to take on ruminating about this big overwhelming thing. You then are free the rest of the week of thinking through that issue. So schedule for the right time and try to get it off your brain are the two most important treatments for rumination. You're welcome. All right, I'll say one more thing about ACT is there's the Hexaflex model that really treats psychological inflexibility. So one of the key diagnostic criteria of autism is psychological inflexibility or an interest. And one way to be able to do so is acceptance and commitment therapy. I wrote cognitive delusion, or maybe autocorrect got me. It's cognitive diffusion, where your thoughts are not you, and every time you have a thought, so kind of like she's saying with rumination, whenever you're able to say, just because a thought comes across my mind, I don't have to answer it, I don't have to think through it, that's true. Every time you have a thought and you go through it, you're going to ruminate. But if you have a thought and you say, that's a thought, I'm observing it as a thought, that's cognitive diffusion, and that decreases feeling overwhelmed and decreases depression. Because sometimes if we have that mental magnet, just thought after thought, that's then reinforcing why we're depressed, you're going to feel more depressed. So cognitive diffusion is a great treatment for it. Experiential acceptance. So accepting what life is like, accepting the way society is organized right now, and tolerating that discomfort that we don't have control over all those things right now. So let's just be present and accepting the context of things, which then gives us relief to then start problem solving. Present moment awareness, be aware of your body. Just flex your muscles and release them as progressive muscle relaxation exercises do. There's a treatment of mindful-based therapy for autism that they did a study in Europe that was incredibly effective. So any mindfulness-based treatment you can find or even do on your own, please do. I mean, Headspace and Calm are the basic versions of it, but that's a start. Try it out, see if it works. Seeing yourself as context or zooming out to the bigger picture. So the more that you would see yourself as in context or as context, you're able to then connect more dots and understand things a little bit more comprehensively. And yeah, mindfulness is incredibly powerful whenever you're able to embrace slowing down your mind and being able to self-soothe. So the last two things of ACT are living through your values and having committed action towards your goals. So the more that you say, I value these things and I'm going to prioritize them and I'm going to take my extra energy each day and go towards it, please do. Because that's how you uniquely get to make a mark in the world. And I think so many individuals with autism have made significant marks in the world because they were psychologically inflexible and didn't give up and advocated strongly for what they believed in. And eventually the world said, hey, you know what? You're persistent about this. We're going to listen and we're going to shift a little bit because you care so much about this topic. We're not just going to let it go. So know that I also see a huge strength in that as well. So creative reasoning and creative thinking. So creative reasoning involves clearly defining the end result and then developing a plan to get there. Even if you have no idea how to get there in the beginning, you see a roadblock and you figure out a way around it, rather than viewing it as like, oh, there's so much effort, let's just give up. Everything with enough time and effort can be reasoned through or worked around. And sometimes the way that we do it is going to be incredibly outside of your comfort zone. Well, getting unstuck sometimes exists outside of traditional hierarchies. Sometimes you may have to disrespect people to get your needs met, because sometimes being respectful of people that are trying to control us doesn't really get you somewhere. So it's okay every once in a while to be disrespectful whenever someone violates your boundaries a lot, to be able to establish it. But hopefully you don't have to get to that point. And using creative thinking to be able to get your needs met is ideal. And there's another handout that I put in there where even in math, there's always more than one way to solve a problem. Where Mount SAC actually had a great guide for how to get through a math problem with creative problem solving, like how to break it down, how to think through it differently, so then we don't feel stuck. There's a question there. Does the therapy to get unstuck include the people that live with you? Yes, I think family therapy is incredibly necessary, and why I use collaborative problem solving is it's not just the autistic teen, like for example, that I've seen that is inflexible. It's often one, if not both parents. So when everyone admits like, I need some skills here and we all need to change, it becomes less of a power hierarchy, and families have profound change and come together and understand each other, and it's beautiful whenever everyone acknowledges, I may not be approaching this the right way. So what happens in therapy? I give you a safe space to dispute long-held beliefs, to work through these concerns. I'm actively engaged in the problem solving rather than just being a disconnected guide. We're going to sit there on a laptop or your phone or even with a notebook and kind of reason through stuff. If you need to make a call and you're overwhelmed by it, we do it in session. I really want to sit there with you as you struggle with some of these tasks or challenges, rather than sit there and tell you, you should try this next time. No, we're going to do that in person. I mean, even with ERP, like I'll get in the car with you and we'll go drive and go do something. I think it's really important as a therapist to meet you exactly where you're at, and whether it's doing an exposure therapy or whether it's achieving a task. I think it's really important to be able to be creative as a therapist, to be able to help someone work through something, or even coordinate with any of your resource team to then help them go help you through that. So whether it's a parent partner, youth partner, an aide, I like to work as a team, because I think everyone, can collaboratively work together to be able to solve an issue. So learned helplessness. I really believe in positive psychology as a way to address learned helplessness, to give you learned optimism. And the more you have learned optimism, you are using all these creative problem solving options on your own. And I really like using worksheets. And if the worksheets don't work, have a conversation about it, or even there's apps that can help you. But the main point is, let's work on low self-esteem by being able to identify your strengths. Let's work on stuck points by going through the trauma and understanding what has happened to you. And let's work through cognitive distortions and logical fallacies, whether it's through a workbook or whether it's through exploring, doing the survey method, or talking with trusted friends, adults, or your treatment team. And here I have my contact us page. But I was actually going to go through all the different resources and just ask you if there's any questions about those. And I see someone in the chat just asking about, like, you know, my treatment options or those kinds of things, or where we're located. But yeah, we're in person or telehealth. We have, a 2-office location in Newport and a 2-office location at the Irvine Spectrum, and we offer telehealth, and we have an office administrator that can coordinate most of those things. And there's also, if you go to uramfamilytherapy.com, there's all the resources you may need to be able to get started. So I'll go through a little of these articles, and I also want you to ask questions now, because I know we got just 10 minutes, but please do ask questions. And if you want, I can explain some of these resources as well. I wouldn't view that as a general rule. I mean, one fascinating thing that I found is that neurotypical individuals hated texting when it first came out, and now almost solely rely on it. So I think it's a social construct that has evolved. I wouldn't view it as a general thing of like online or as someone said, can you show the second last slide again, which has the one sentence, why consequence is not motivated and sometimes go to the opposite. Let me see. I don't see that one. I'm trying to think which thing I would say. I'm not sure exactly which thing that's referencing, but I may mention opposite action, where in dialectical behavioral therapy is sometimes doing the opposite action of what you are doing will lead you to be unstuck, but I don't think that's it. I do know for consequences, where I don't believe that giving consequences or removing things leads to long-term change, but it does lead to short-term disruption of creating more problems. So if your parents take away your phone, I definitely think it helps you not get in more trouble, but it doesn't really lead you to respect your parents more, or like on how to manage a phone healthily, but it definitely stops you from creating more issues in the moment. I'm not sure what consequences not motivating means. My advice for finding a career is really documenting, like I'm talking about the visual mapping of what your strengths are, what things you have passion for. And then every day, if you have just 5 minutes, try to figure out a job listing or a YouTube video of someone that does something similar to what you're looking at, and then charting that. Because I mean, there's probably what, like 2,000 categories of jobs that exist, and probably only 50 in line with whatever your passion or your desire would be. You're welcome. This page here is all about screeners or assessments. And I don't recommend that you do them all on your own, but know that they're out there. And the one video that I only barely mentioned was Michelle Sharfin's Unconditional Positive Regard for Your Kids. So Michelle is a great local leader in this space, even though she, doesn't work in this field anymore. She's a manager at a Torrance Medical Center, I think, but she had a great TED Talk talking about how you can have unconditional positive regard for your kids, where for a lot of caregivers or parents that I've worked with, we feel like controlling our kids or doing everything we can to prevent bad things from happening is a great idea. But oftentimes it leads them to struggle and leads us to be frustrated. So her TED Talk was incredibly powerful related to that. And the other link is the Hexaflex model, is acceptance and commitment therapy's guide for treatment. And all the different research I referenced there. I barely mentioned cognitive load theory, but I don't think that we should overload anyone with data, trying to get them to learn something. And I hope a lot of schools incorporate that. And the Mount SAC math handouts there. And then the book I'd recommend is The Fallacy Detective to Identify Bad Reasoning. It's a great workbook to then understand all the social constructs of how people believe irrational things or do irrational things. And then there's the ABCDE framework handout to kind of do therapy on your own. And all the different local support groups. So the Orange County Asperger Support Group is one of my favorites. There's a few others out there as well that are great supports. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Michael. And thanks everybody for coming.